What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and we got probably the biggest ban and restricted announcement in terms of impact specifically for the modern format. The One Ring has finally been cast into fire, or whatever the heck happens in Harry Potter. Amp Raptor is gone. Now you can't get extra free value in those pesky energy decks, and unfortunately our emotional support elk is going bye-bye. Also bye-bye in Pioneer as well, which we'll be returning to here next week. But not only that, where those bans are very impactful to the format. Obviously Boros Energy takes a big hit from the most played card in the format getting taken away, and of course Amp Raptor again getting you all that free value, and even Jengatha as well, just being a go-to companion for those decks. But we have 4 new cards that are returning to Modern, and really cards that maybe some kind of expected to make a return, but others, including myself, I didn't think could ever come back, and they get a new lease on life for Modern, and we're going to kind of go over each individual one and just talk about them. We're going to see potential impacts that they could have on the Modern format. We're already kind of seeing it now that we've had about a challenge or two since these cards have been legal again in Modern, and really some of them aren't nearly as dominant as I kind of thought they would be, and some of them are just kind of exactly in the spot that I thought that they would be. But I think the impact definitely goes farther than just the actual cards in sleeves on the table. I think they're going to have a major impact on just the player base as a whole, trying to get more players back into the Modern format now that we have Modern Horizon sets and kind of a new philosophy on how we approach the ban and restricted announcements. But of course, before we get too deep into the video and we talk about some of the unbanned cards and probably some of the most iconic cards in Magic's history, if you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk mainly about the Modern, Pioneer, and Standard formats, as well as doing some other longer form content. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. If you go in the description down below, I have a few links. One goes to the Casual Spikes podcast, where me and my co-host Randy over at Modern with Randy talk about the current RCQ season and some other news going on in Magic. So if any of that interests you as well, go ahead and subscribe over there. We try to post a video weekly. On top of that too, I have a link to my Twitch channel if you want to follow me over on Twitch, where I'm going to go live stream and most likely end up re-uploading those streams later on YouTube. But if you want to catch me live, that's where you can find me over there. And finally, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders, for sponsoring the channel. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service where you can go and rent cards, namely from some of the decks that we show off on this channel. You can go and rent those, play in challenges and different leagues, and then on top of that too, they run their own free tournament series where you can go and qualify for their invitational tournament at the end of the year. Of course, that tournament has already passed, but nonetheless, you can end up qualifying for it next year. So if you sign up with my code in the description down below, you'll end up saving up 5% on your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for sponsoring the channel, and let's go ahead and get into our very first card. So starting off our list, we're going to go with Splinter Twin. I think Splinter Twin is a little bit different from the other 3 cards that were, coming off the ban list as well. So Splinter Twin is definitely the build around card. Like, this is what your deck is kind of building up to do. Splinter Twin is a pretty good value card on its own. 4 mana, you get to enchant a creature, then you tap the creature and you make a copy of that creature. It gains haste, and then you exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So you could put this on some different value creatures, like Snapcaster Mage is something that comes to mind from the before times, where you could just put this on a Snapcaster Mage and essentially, be able to tap it to then get another blocker, like a 2-power blocker for free, while also getting to flashback another spell. The nature of kind of these blue-red twin decks in the past, before Splinter Twin ended up getting banned in 2016, were kind of these like burn style, like counter key things, and if your opponent ever taps out, then you just had like an automatic win button. So really, like, the power for Splinter Twin, came in the style of deck that I wanted to play. It could kind of play this 1-for-1 game where it was kind of a 1-for-1. I mean, you get to play things like Remand and Electrolyze that would deal with some of the creatures available to players in the Modern format, while also just getting you a card back. And of course, with some of the other tricks, you were just able to kind of, slowly grind your opponent down in this blue-red strategy, and then ultimately get to a point where you play a Pestermite or a Deceiver Exarch on your opponent's turn, maybe being able to leave up mana, but with the potential to then just win the game on turn 4. Playing a Splinter Twin, you end up copying the creature by tapping it, and then it enters the battlefield. Both of those creatures creatures will tap or untap a permanent, so then you can end up just targeting the enchanted Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch. You untap it, then you tap it again, make a copy of it, target the enchanted Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch. Repeat the process until you have as many Deceiver Exarchs or Pestermites that you need to then swing at your opponent and win the game. Of course, that is the ideal way that Splinter Twin works. As we've kind of seen with Splinter Twin coming back, the very first thing players kind of gravitated to is actually the card Fear of Missing Out, which, enters the battlefield, draw a card, discard a card for 2 mana. It's 2/3, and whenever you attack, if you have Delirium, you can untap target creature, and then after this phase is an additional combat phase, so you can just, copy the FOMO, attack with your copied FOMO, and then untap your enchanted one to then be able to tap it again to make another one. And since it's the first time it attacked each turn, it's going to be able to untap the enchanted one. And as long as you attack with the new token that you made as well, you're going to be able to, and really that's the only one that you can't attack with because the other ones are going to be tapped. But you can do that, and then, of course, Goblin Bombardment is a new card that is in the format, I believe, thanks to Modern Horizons 3, and you are able to then just throw those tokens at your opponent to kind of get around people playing the Scion plus Leyline combo, which seems to be decently popular from the looks of it. From the domain strategies, which if people are going to try doing Splinter Twin stuff with FOMO, that is a way that you can kind of beat them before they get a Goblin Bombardment. I don't know why that was such a hard word. So overall, Splinter Twin was very dominant back in the day just because it was very hard for decks to interact with at a very low cost while also adding ample pressure to the board, or at least kind of like pushing their game plan towards an actual finish. I mean, just tapping out at any point in the game against the blue-red decks on, after turn 4 was an absolute death sentence because, you could tap out for a 3-4 mana card, pass the turn, and all of a sudden your opponent flashes in a Deceiver Exarch, untaps, slaps a Splinter Twin on it, game over. You've already lost the game. That's just kind of the crazy things that could happen, back in like the early to mid 2010s. Now, since Splinter Twin was banned, Fatal Push got printed pretty shortly after. We had the Oath of the Gatewatch Pro Tour, which of course is known as Eldrazi Winter, or at least the start of Eldrazi Winter, when I believe 6 out of the 8 top 8 deck lists in that tournament were the colorless Eldrazi or some form of Eldrazi variant. We ended up getting Fatal Push in kind of the next set of sets in Kaladesh. And then, of course, as we went on with the Modern Horizons sets, we have Solitude as a way that you can interact with, your opponent's creatures for free. You have Force of Negation to counter the Splinter Twin. I believe you have Force of Despair, which, funny enough, is like the RCQ, like top 8 promo, which is pretty sweet. But you can essentially use that as like a way to kill all the tokens if your opponent is just trying to attack with a Splinter Twin or, not really Splinter Twin, really with like Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite or even a FOMO. You can kill it before they are able to attack with it, meaning that the FOMO just stays tapped and you kind of give yourself another turn. You have Force of Vigor to deal with Splinter Twin just straight up, and again, if they're going for like the FOMO thing too, you can kind of hit both combo pieces with one card. And then, of course, too, we have a plethora of 1 mana removal spells that are so good. On top of Fatal Push, we have Galvanic Discharge, you have Unholy Heat, you have things like Path to Exile still stick around, even though I don't think they're necessarily that good. But, there's plenty of options for players to play, and especially if people are going to be using FOMO as like the combo piece, then Lightning Bolt also hits it, where Lightning Bolt couldn't hit Deceiver Exarch, and that was kind of what made Exarch very good, at least back in the day, is that it was just a card that could dodge Lightning Bolt, which was definitely a pretty common card played back then. So, with all that being said, can Splinter Twin survive in the modern format? I don't know if it's necessarily going to thrive, but I think it's going to be something that people will still play for quite a while. I think the Splinter Twin really was for the culture of modern. I mean, there was a lot of players that I maybe stopped playing because Splinter Twin was banned. And of course, as we kind of had these Modern Horizons sets come out, some players have decided like, hey, I'm just not going to support the format anymore. I'm not going to play it. Totally fine, your choice. But I think Splinter Twin is like a way to entice those players to kind of come back and play the modern that they remember. Now, obviously, completely different landscape. I don't think Splinter Twin is a tier 1 deck anymore. Maybe tier 2, but I definitely think at the end of the day, this is going to be a card that was totally fine for modern, that is very iconic, that people want to play, and I could definitely see a lot of players picking this up and just wanting to play the deck and just trying to relive some part of them that is very nostalgic for the old modern format. I think it's still very powerful. Just the fact that you have a 2-card combo that essentially ends the game is definitely going to always be good enough as long as it can kind of fit into its own niche. And I think where like blue-red decks have been pretty good throughout Modern's history and even into the 2000s with the release of these Modern Horizons sets, I can see Splinter Twin kind of surviving in this climate, but definitely not thriving the way they used to, where in a sea of other broken decks that kind of arose before we got to Eldrazi Winter, where Splinter Twin was one of the best decks to be playing. I just don't think it has, enough weight to kind of throw around to hold itself there, but nonetheless, a very good card, and I think very nostalgic for old Modern players. So I think this is probably the least likely one to get banned of the group, and it's just going to be a lot of fun for those older players. But now we're going to be moving on to another card that I didn't think could ever actually come off the ban list, and we definitely encroach a lot closer to this could potentially get banned again territory. So next we have Green Sun Zenith. For a green and X at sorcery speed, you search your library for a green creature card with converted mana cost X or less. You put it onto the battlefield, shuffle your library, then you shuffle Green Sun Zenith into its owner's library. So to start, Green Sun Zenith only gets shuffled in your library when it resolves. If your opponent counters it or does something to it to essentially stop it from resolving, it's just going to go to your graveyard. It's not going to get shuffled in. This is a very annoying tutor, and the first thing that came to my mind when this card was unbanned was that the Primeval Titan decks have kind of another tool at their disposal to go and find Primeval Titan. This having the added benefit of being able to find its other green creatures, so you can go get like a Zusa, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, or a Boreal Grazer, and these are ways that you can kind of ramp yourself even more. This deck does have a lot of redundancy in trying to find multiple amulets, of course having just 4 copies of the namesake card, Michaelson's Garden, so you can copy amulets that are in play, or even Urza's Sagas to go fetch those amulets. So there's like a lot of ways where you can get 2, 3, 4 amulets into play very early on, and with Green Sun Zenith, just getting those creatures that can help produce extra mana by giving you extra land drops or just putting lands into play tapped, which means that the amulet will be able to untap them, meaning that you're able to generate even more mana and potentially use 2 Green Sun Zeniths to go find 1 Titan, but then end up finding, again, something like a Dryad of the Elysian Grove, where you can kind of start setting up the Valakut kills if you can't necessarily go off by casting enough Titans and then giving them haste and swinging. Also kind of a way that can help you close out the game as well. Or just getting Azusas to kind of dump your hand full of lands to be able to kind of, again, keep comboing and keep generating more mana. So Green Sun right there is already a huge upgrade, I think, for the Titan decks. Now, whether it's going to be coming up in other strategies is kind of yet to be seen. I think that that's probably the easiest one that it slots into. We'd seen things like Mono Green Elves kind of play this, in the very early parts of like the 2010s, like roughly when this was printed in Mirrored and Besiege. And, obviously those decks were very good, but they were also playing Summoner's Pact and able to like play a different like kind of combo style game plan. So definitely the landscape of Modern is a lot different there, but there's a lot of good green creatures, from getting to pay X0 to go get a Dryad Arbor to kind of ramp on turn 1 to then kind of build up towards maybe a bigger Green Sun Zenith later, to playing a bunch of Mana Dorks, maybe playing a Devotion style deck and trying to go find a really big creature that'll just come down and end the game. Like this going to get something like Crater Hoof in those elf decks that we mentioned, where you get a few lords down. We do have Priest of Titania, we do have Elvish Archdruid, and I'm sure that there's another creature out there that ends up tapping for just a ton of mana for very little, so you can just easily go and get something like a Crater Hoof Behemoth with this, while only tapping like 1 or 2 creatures and maybe like 1 or 2 lands, to then just go and put like, 36 power into play, plus whatever's already on the battlefield. So this is definitely a lot of applications. There's just like a toolbox worth of things for what players can do with Green Sun Zenith. There's a lot of really good green creatures. Of course, we know that there's some really good kind of like, not necessarily hate bear pieces, that's probably not the word I want to use, but definitely different creatures that get rid of artifacts and enchantments that you can go get with Green Sun Zenith that are on the cheap, so you can end up paying like 3 mana to go get those kind of things. You can go get like Reclamation Sage for 4 mana, which is totally fine. There's just a plethora of options that you have with Green Sun Zenith. And I think, initially I thought that this was probably like one of 2 cards that would end up back on the ban list, in a very short time, just because I think it would be pretty good. But I think the more I kind of look at this card, I think it's going to be really good. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be busted. It's going to be busted in probably, the Titan decks, because again, it's going to be good at getting a creature that is essentially going to end the game, or at least like put your opponent in a position to win the game on the next turn. And now with the format, I think being just a hair slower, because a lot of players are going to want to try out some of these other cards. Well, also the fact that, between having like the 8 different degrees that you need to be able to pilot a Titan deck optimally, there's just a good chance that anytime Green Sun Zenith is going and getting a Titan, that the game could just also be over. So that's some things to kind of look out for. I think Green Sun Zenith is going to be a pretty big part of Modern. I don't know exactly, the impact it's going to have outside of, again, the one good deck that I think it's going to automatically slot into. But, of course, as we kind of see Modern kind of flesh itself out, we could see Green Sun, approach even closer to, potentially being one of the most broken cards that's been unbanned into the Modern format. But I think that the next 2 cards have a very, very, very good shot of going back on the ban list. And they're probably, between all 4 of them, they're probably the 2 least flashiest cards on of the 4, but I think that they have probably the most potential to absolutely be broken and potentially, I'm going to say ruin the Modern format, but, obviously make it very polarized and focused around these 2 cards. So, really, for these next 2 cards, you can put them as, like, 1A and 1B. I don't think I'm necessarily sure which one is better than the other one. I think it is a potential debate, but MOX Opal, for sure, is one of the best. It's got to be up there. Like I said, 1A and 1B. For 0 mana, you get a Mox that can tap for any 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, but you must have 3 or more artifacts you control to be able to activate this ability. Of course, Mox being able to count itself as an artifact, it is legendary. So if you do have multiple copies, you just can't have multiples sitting on the battlefield. But a lot of time, it doesn't matter if they just act like a Lotus Petal some of the time, where you just end up playing things like Mishra's Bauble is like a good way to kind of get towards Metalcraft. We've seen some of the other like Emery type decks, we've seen kind of Urza decks kind of come back, which has been really cool to see, because I absolutely love Urza as a card. That's been really cool. We've seen the affinity strategies that maybe they don't necessarily look like they did before, where you're playing like Ornithopters, Memnites, Cranial Planings, whatever, but now you're playing like Kappa Cannoneer, and you're playing like Mirror Enforcer and Sojourner's Companion and Frogmites and those sort of things, playing like almost an actual affinity kind of like aggro deck. Affinity just kind of slots in everywhere. I think that even the Teamer Breach deck is one that kind of upgrades pretty heavily with MOX Opal, instead of having to necessarily rely on MOX Amber when it's trying to loop. MOX Opal, you're going to have a pretty easy time maintaining Metalcraft, especially if you're a deck that wants to play it. The fact that it's 0 mana as well, definitely living up to its name of a MOX. And, it's a $200 card now. At least, like, last time I checked, it's like a $200 card. Like, this is absolutely insane. And again, it's not super flashy. Splinter Twin, it's like tap to make a copy. It's kind of like, oh, what's like the best creature I can enchant with this? Either to just win the game, or like the one I can get the most value out of that is going to absolutely bury my opponent. MOX Opal is pretty straightforward. You build towards having enough artifacts to where you play this on turn 1, you're going to end up ideally having 2 mana. You figure out some of the best 2 and 3 mana cards you can play on turn 1 and then on turn 2, and just try to figure out how to win the game from there. The fact that it as an artifact has a lot of synergy with a lot of the other affinity type cards that you'd want to be playing in a Modern anyway. And of course, Affinity has gotten a ton of support, between the big score set where we got some Simulacrum Synthesizer, and then of course some of the other cards from Modern Horizons 3 that have kind of juiced up the Affinity archetype. MOX Opal is just kind of the cherry on top, where it's just going to maybe not necessarily push the decks into tier 1 specifically from like the affinity side, but definitely the breach decks are something that I would expect to be very good going forward with access to MOX Opal. And then of course those artifact strategies, just having that extra mana, a turn or 2 sooner ends up going a pretty long way, especially when you have all the other ways that you can make mana. And even like MOX Opal, again, doing its impression of like a Lotus Petal when you have another MOX Opal is totally fine, and getting to cast, potentially 3 drops on turn 1 are pretty insane. So to me, MOX Opal is definitely bordering on like this card could potentially be too good for Modern even still. While I think before it was a card that kind of died for the sins of KCI and didn't necessarily deserve it then, there's a pretty good chance that with all the artifact support and all the really good artifacts that we have in the format now, that MOX Opal might be too good, but only time will tell, of course, with any of these cards. The next one, though, I think is almost assuredly a slam dunk within a year is going to get banned, and I really don't think it's that close. I think MOX Opal is the only card that comes close to rivaling it, and again, I could see it just kind of being on the same level, but it definitely feeds into a different kind of story that we're trying to tell, like with what decks are trying to play it. So let's go ahead and check it out. So lastly, we have Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting is super simple. 1 red mana, you draw 2 cards, you discard 2 cards, and you can flash it back for 2 and a red. This is easily one of the most busted cards that has been unbanned in Modern in quite a while. So Faithless Looting, every part of this is great. 1 mana, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. You know, the thing that people gravitate to most when they see Faithless Looting is they think of the graveyard-based decks where, you know, Goryo's Vengeance has been very popular, especially in Esper. You know, this at least gives you some pause of maybe playing something like Mardu, where you do have access to Faithless Looting to be able to get those cards in the graveyard, and of course be able to flash it back later if you so choose to, when you kind of have the mana lying around. In the fair decks, this kind of helps you filter your draws, where if you're kind of flooding out on lands, it can kind of take those excess lands and hopefully find you some action. And if you're kind of looking for lands, you can get rid of some of those cards that are pretty uncastable in your hand that you can then pitch to your graveyard. And then of course you have the Delirium based strategies, where this is going to put a sorcery in your graveyard, potentially put up to 3 card types just by itself. And of course, if any of those are not a land, then you follow it up with a fetch land, or, you know, have it a fetch land in your graveyard. You know, this could just potentially give you Delirium on turn 1, which has been pretty integral for cards like FOMO that are increasingly seeing more play in Modern. And of course, you know, just the different strategies. This enables so much. The fact that you are discarding those cards too, Hollow One decks absolutely love that, because Hollow One costs 2 less for each card that you discard. So Faithless Looting potentially just reducing the cost by 4 on a on something like a Hollow One. Drawing cards is really good, especially on the other side if you end up having a Bowmaster and your opponent plays Faithless Looting. It's kind of, I guess, a knock against it, but, you know, Orcish Bowmaster seems like a pretty big winner from this unban, because this is just a card that people want to play. This is a card that any deck could play. If you're doing unfair things with it, you want it because it gets important cards into your graveyard, or it kind of helps you dig through your deck to find certain combo pieces. For fair decks, it helps them find action and get rid of essentially cards that they don't need, hopefully digging towards cards that they do need, or at least finding those cards that they do need. This is by far one of the cards I would expect to make the biggest impact. You know, people talk about, is it Phoenix? We talk about the Goryo's Vengeance deck. So we talk about this, that, and the other. There's just so many decks that are already pretty good in the format, or, you know, or at least on the fringes of, you know, being kind of like a tier 2, or like being featured on the, you know, in the format, to just immediately being players and immediately, you know, giving players pause, like, wait a minute, like this might actually be, you know, the thing that kind of brings back some of those old archetypes. And this is a card that I would expect, if I had to pick one of the 4, I think would end up on the ban list within a year. I just don't see how this card ends up surviving. Of course, again, you know, one of the biggest knocks to this card is other people playing like Orcish Bowmaster. But at the end of the day, you know, people are playing Burning Inquiry with Bowmaster still legal in the format, and they don't care if they get, you know, pinged by a Bowmaster, because sometimes they're playing their own Bowmaster and they're pinging you because of Burning Inquiry. You know, it's just, there's a lot to unpack with this card. There's a lot that it offers to various different decks in the format, and I think it's too good. I still think it's too good of a card, and I don't know. I just think that this is busted. I will be playing Faithless Looting decks in Modern until the end of time, or until Faithless Looting it gets banned. And like I said, probably within the year, I would expect Faithless Looting to be a card that kind of takes over the format. And maybe not in the same way that we would see something like a Boros Energy take over, but Faithless Looting is just such a good role player and just makes a lot of decks go. But, you know, that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below which of the 4 cards you think could end up banned, or maybe what you're excited to play in the format. I would love to absolutely hear it. Of course, liking and commenting helps out with the algorithm as well to reach more people and kind of help us grow the channel and everything, which I do appreciate very much. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.